Hello everyone, Tmmgamer here, and today I have the pleasure of bringing you another one of my football talk videos, the video series where I sit down and talk a little bit about real life football and just the events that have been going on in football. There's one little non-footballing topic I might squeeze in at the end depending on how quickly I talk about the other things I want to get on, so fingers crossed I can talk about that. But firstly, let's talk about the England game. Now, England played Friday night, which was 2 days ago. I'm recording this on the Sunday, should be uploaded later today as well, so they played 2 days ago. Against Peru, solid 3-0 win in the end, and it was the first opportunity we had to see the World Cup players get a game. In fact, it's going to be the last game in England for them because they're flying out to Florida later today for another training camp. I have a couple more friendlies there before the tournament, which is so close now. I'm so looking forward to the World Cup. It's going to be amazing. But like I said, first opportunity to see the World Cup players, and I thought by and large England played okay. First half, nothing really happened. There weren't any major chances. It was just a little bit pedestrian, but in the second half we looked a lot more lively, scored the goals. I thought Raheem Sterling did a great job when he came on off the bench. He really did liven us up, and perhaps that's how he's going to be using the World Cup. You know, come on as an impact sub, last 20 minutes. He played in that sort of central number 10 role, which he's had a lot of success at with Liverpool this season, but he's so flexible playing either wing, play in that role and have a big impact. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the team that started the game on Friday were the team that started the World Cup group games, because that was pretty much the standard back four. You could argue possibly Luke Shaw gets a look in on one of the, possibly the Costa Rica game, get him into the tournament, but we'll see how that happens. Midfield, Gerrard and Henderson, probably going to be the starters, and then he started Danny Welbeck, and I think Danny Welbeck is one of Roy Hodgson's favourite players. He's sort of like a faster James Milner, isn't he, Danny Welbeck? He'll always put a shift in. He's got good technical ability. He said in a recent press interview that he doesn't like playing on the left, but that's the only way I can see him getting into this England team. And you could argue, like you said, you could start Raheem Sterling on the left. And if Theo Walcott was fit, possibly Theo Walcott would start him and Lallana instead of Danny Welbeck. So I think Danny's got to be relatively happy. I mean, you're going to a World Cup, you're playing for your country. You'd play in any position the manager picks you, surely. I can understand week in, week out for your club, you want to establish yourself in your favourite role and then hopefully earn recognition in your favourite role for your country. But if you get into that starting lineup, you have to be prepared to play anywhere. And I can't imagine he'd be unhappy to play in the World Cup on the left wing. So he'll give you very, very solid work rate on that wing. He'll track back. He'll do it without asking as well. Some of the players in the world, very, very good going forward. They have to also be cajoled into tracking back. They have to be given, rewards, incentives. Please track back. Have to be convinced to do it. Danny Welbeck does it automatically. I think it's the same with Adam Lallana as well. Two wingers with good work ethic, and that's always something Roy Hodgson wants in his teams. Now, that's why you always used to pick James Milner a lot, and I'm actually quite pleased Milner's been phased out. Not because he's a bad player, he's definitely worthy of his place in the squad and a very useful utility player. But whenever England play James Milner, they always play him in that wide midfield support role, not a winger role. He always sits really deep, and we're always too defensive. And that's the last thing I want to see in this World Cup. We've got to go out there and actually have a chance of scoring goals. And with the team that Hodgson picked, that was definitely an opportunity. Had Rooney in behind Sturridge up front, two out-and-out attacking players wide. Like I mentioned, they've got good work rate, but there's no doubt Adam Lallana and Danny Welbeck are very forward-orientated players who like to get up the field and like to get the ball and try and do something with it. As opposed to James Milner, who's more of a defensive-orientated player. He can still cross the ball, he can still dribble, but he's in that team primarily to be solid. That's the reason why you'd pick a James Milner on the right. I've always said this, that I think James Milner's a much better central midfielder than he is a winger. When he was at Aston Villa, I was a season ticket holder and I had the pleasure of watching him week in, week out. And I have to say, he did a lot of great work in the central midfield, because people forget that Aston Villa midfield was Ashley Young, Gareth Barry, James Milner and Stuart Downing. So we had Young and Downing on the wings, and Milner was the workhorse in that central midfield, and he did a very, very good job. And I think people forget that. He's always played on the wing at Man City, and I think England have forgotten that he's a good central midfielder, and I'd much rather see him play there than wide. And obviously, centre midfield's probably our strongest area. We've got a lot of talent in that midfield. Ross Barkley and Jack Wilshere didn't start. We've got Michael Carrick, who's not even in the 23. when you look at, for example, our centre-back position, when we've had to call up Chris Smalling after, not a particularly good season from Chris Smalling. He's in the World Cup squad, and the same with Phil Jones, playing in an underperforming Manchester United team. You see that's a weak area for us. If Gary Cahill gets injured, we're in big trouble at the centre-back position, because Cahill's been outstanding this season. He's by far, I think, our best centre-back. If he picks up an injury, we're in a bit of trouble. But in central midfield, you can't really say the same. We've got a lot of talent in that position. So that's why Milner doesn't play in centre mid for England. But it would be nice to see him. Got a few friendlies. This is an opportunity to experiment. This is an opportunity to get a team out in the hot weather as well. Playing in America, it's going to be nice to actually acclimatise. We had a training camp in Portugal, which is always nice. Apparently, Roy Hodgson worked the players pretty hard to try and get them fully fit, because that's the thing with like Phil Jagielka as well. He has missed a lot of football. Jack Wilshere's missed a lot of football. Phil Jones. All of these players are injured, and they need to get game time. You cannot afford these players getting their first real taste of first team action in the last 20 minutes of the final group game when we need to score 2 goals to go through. Or against Italy, there's an injury in the first 5 minutes, they have to come on and play 85 minutes against the Italians in Manaus, and they'll be completely gone by the 55th minute, because it's going to be so hot out there. Can't afford that. You've got to play these players. But I thought, as a first game, it was relatively solid. Definitely worked our way into it. We didn't set the world alight with that performance, but it was pretty straightforward. Peru really only had one major chance. Joe Hart had a couple of saves, but they were fairly straightforward saves. You'd expect him to make them. There were no world-class, oh, what a great save that is, that's bailed us out sort of moment. Could have created a few more chances, but overall solid. Definitely a good position to build from, and like I say, 2 more friendlies to come before the group stages, a bit more of an opportunity to progress and move on and hopefully improve the level of performance. So that was England. Relatively happy with England. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the new allegations that have come out today, actually fresh off the press from the Sunday Times, I think it was, coming out with a huge array of new allegations about the FIFA World Cup bid for Qatar, the 2022 World Cup, sorry. This is just a long line of these allegations have come out about this bid. And, you can say whatever you want about, Britain getting turned down, England's World Cup bid getting turned down. Russia, they won the bid fair and square. They've got a good footballing tradition. There's no doubt that they can put a lot of money into their bids. Look how much money they spent on the Sochi Olympics. It was insane. I think it was actually 3 times more than GB spent on the Summer Olympics, which is just a ludicrous sum of money. So they're prepared to do that. You can question whether they're the most liberal society in the world. You're getting a lot of people from a lot of different countries, a lot of different lifestyles coming to a place. They have to be accepting of those lifestyles. That is just the bottom line. Obviously all of the bad press about Sochi, about Russia's anti-gay laws, about just all of that stuff. That's not ideal. But compared to Qatar, with zero footballing tradition, I would have preferred to see the World Cup go to Saudi Arabia, because at least Saudi Arabia have been to a World Cup. I mean, they might have been on the wrong end of a few thrashings, but at least they got there. At least they're a footballing nation. Qatar is just a very small, incredibly hot desert principality. With zero footballing tradition, with no infrastructure in place. Like, how many of these stadiums are going to have to be built from scratch with private money? It's always been a very dodgy one. It's going to be absolutely stifling as well. If you think Brazil's hot, wait until you go and play a World Cup in Qatar. That is going to be boiling. So that was always a bit of a head scratcher. And we've had these allegations come out before. Again, they're centred around Mohammed bin Hammam, FIFA's former vice president. And it was all about passing money to African and Caribbean FIFA members to get them to vote for Qatar. That's the allegation. And there's been rumours of 3 million payments paid from him to all of these people. Obviously, bin Hammam's a Qatari, but the Qatar bid team have always stressed that he was not part of the official bid. He was just an individual, and if he did any wrongdoing, it's on his head. And FIFA have washed their hands pretty much completely of this. They sacked him. They've appointed, I think, a bloke called Garcia. I can't remember his first name. Michael Garcia. That's his name. There we go. Came to me eventually to run this independent, in inverted commas, investigation into the bidding process. And we've had today Jim Boyce, who's the current FIFA vice president, an Irishman, come out and say that if allegations are proved to be correct, the bidding process should be redone. And I completely agree. We've had all of these allegations come out. FIFA have banned bin Hammam from ever playing a meaningful role in world football anymore. So you don't do that for no reason. If this guy's innocent, why have you banned him? So there must have been something dodgy going on right from the start that they've known about. These Sunday Times allegations, there's hundreds and hundreds of leaked documents that they claim links bin Hammam with all of these payments, because one of the things that he said about the payments was that they were just normal grant payments, because obviously FIFA earns an astronomical amount of money, it gives out a certain amount of money, although not as much as it earns, which is interesting, that the body of a world sport is a profit-making organisation and not actually an organisation really concerned with the welfare of world football, which is interesting in itself. But all these documents that come out, and they've tried to explain by saying, oh, these are just grants for football, they're grants to help build facilities, etc. But there's strong evidence suggesting that they were linked to votes, and if there is vote rigging and corruption in an election, the election has to be redone, especially if it's for the richest, well, if not the richest, certainly one of the richest sports in the world. Probably, the most global sport. I don't think there's a more global sport than football. I mean, you can argue things like hockey, and apparently hockey's played more around the world than football is, but in terms of actual, viewing figures and the money involved, I don't think football really has any major competitors. It really is an outstanding size sport. It can't afford this. It cannot afford this. FIFA has been ridiculed and criticised for decades about being undemocratic and a gravy train for all the people who get elected. And the fact that Sepp Blatter can run unopposed for president is just insane. It's like, what? This is an elected position. There should be choices in the election. This is, Rule 101 of politics and democracy. You cannot have the same guy run unopposed for election again and again, because that sort of defeats the point of having a democracy and having a vote. If you're not going to have a meaningful vote, what's the point of voting? This is the sort of arguments being made. So I seriously hope the vote is redone, because even though it would absolutely suck from my point of view having a World Cup in Australia because of the time difference, and all the games would kick off at crikey o'clock in the morning and I have to get up, and I'm definitely a night owl. I'm not a morning bird by any stretch of the imagination. I do enjoy my lies in. I quite happily stay up till 4 o'clock at night and then get up later in the morning, as opposed to go to bed at like 10 and get up at 4. I would not like to do that for a job, but this World Cup has to be revoted on. I don't think there's any doubt about that anymore. It's just been a constant stream for a couple of years now of all of this problem. All of the same thing that's been coming out. Corruption, bribery, vote rigging. Just not even counting the practical problems of actually hosting this tournament in this country, which are going to be insane. It's like, they vote, surely, when the bid has been put down for a summer World Cup, and that is what they were competing for, to run a World Cup in the summer, you would have had to look at that and say, right, you've got no infrastructure, you are a boiling hot country, absolutely roasting. How are we going to play these games in stadiums where the temperature is going to go above 50 degrees? Fans, not just for the players, which, it is pretty dangerous playing in that heat. You're going to be playing 3 games in a week in that heat, which is insane. So you're going to have to either have an air-conditioned roof stadium everywhere, or you're going to have massive fans around the pitch. And if you go for the fan route, all the when I say fans, like the giant rotating things, not the actual football fans. If you go the giant rotating fan route, the football fans are still going to be melting. So immediately, problem 1, no infrastructure. Problem 2, too hot. At that point, you should basically just write the bid off as impossible. That's basically what it was. It is impossible to run an effective World Cup in the summer in Qatar. Yet FIFA bid for it. Why? There's got to be something dodgy going on there. So this World Cup has to be voted on. If you go to Australia, for example, that's a very hot country, but it's going to be in their winter. So it would be, I mean, winters in Australia aren't, Swedish winters where you got to bring your duffel coat. It's still going to be 20, 25, possibly 30 degrees. I remember I went to holiday in Australia and we went in the English summer, so but the Australian winter. And we went to Alice Springs in the middle of the country, and it was 35, 36 degrees, and we come from rainy England, and we were like asking, we were sitting around the pool at the hotel, it's like, where have the umbrellas gone? Because there were no sunshades or umbrellas or anything. And I said, oh, we've sent them away for cleaning, it's winter. It's like 38 degrees. I am sweating, my balls are so sweaty. All the talcum powder in Australia would not sort them out. It's like, come on. This is what the World Cup is, but that's still like 15 degrees cooler than it's going to be in Qatar. And Qatar doesn't have any stadiums built, and no one's interested in football. But it does have a lot of oil money. That is one thing it's got going for it. So, I think this World Cup just needs to be re-voted on. I don't think any other solution is acceptable anymore. Because there's just been too much criticism and controversy. You have to do this now. It just has to be re-voted on. You know, all of these documents are gonna be proven. That's the thing. You've already fired a guy. You've already banned a guy from being a part of world football because of what he did in this voting campaign. So already you've admitted that there's been improper conduct. This is not even considering the fresh allegations that have come out. So we've got the Sunday Times have their new batch today. The Sun newspaper does its regular columns on the problems with the World Cup, you know, column inch after column inch with all of the things. FIFA itself has run its own investigation, which is still ongoing, about all of these problems. The tide is overwhelming now, absolutely overwhelming. This World Cup has to be re-voted on. It has to be, and it has to be an open ballot, completely open. We should be able to see who everybody has voted for, which again, quite important in this sort of situation. We have to see all of their expenses published for the... Let's just go for the year before. The year before the vote, we need to see all of their expenses, just to make sure that no dodgy dealings have gone on. And if all of that happens, and Qatar still gets the vote, we can, fair enough, and go, yep, fair enough, they've won the vote fairly. And it doesn't matter how the practical things will be done, at least the vote's been fair, and Qatar can get off building all these air-conditioned stadiums. At the moment, that doesn't look very likely, because FIFA actually doing something useful, like the FA doing something useful, or the Premier League doing something useful, is very rare. So I'm not exactly going to pin my hopes on it. I'm not going to put any money on it happening. But slowly now, the weight and the pressure is just building, and it's a relentless build as well. It is just snowballed out of control, and I don't think FIFA can realistically resist this anymore. It has to happen. So guys, thank you so much for listening to the video. I really hope you've enjoyed it. As always, I'd be very interested in hearing your opinions on the things I've discussed. Unfortunately, I didn't cover the third topic. I might do a separate video on that at some point. Probably, well, I might do it later today, actually, see how I feel. But until then, thank you so much for listening to the video, and as always, have a great day.